Hey, Triple Fivers, Andrew here. Hope you're doing well. Here today with not really a full watch review as much as what I would say maybe a watch introduction. What we have here is the Solas Starlight. This is a micro brand watch that is about to have a campaign on Kickstarter, and so just to get some of those cliches out of the way, what makes this watch very interesting is really something quite remarkably beautiful, and that is a fantastic Microrotor movement. This is an interesting dress watch that's coming in at a very competitive price for having this kind of very special movement, $400. And what we're going to talk about in this video is how they were able to get such an interesting movement into a watch at this price, as well as some of the other main design features of the watch, what interests me about the design, and also what are some of the things that you should know that are maybe reasons not to be interested in the watch. And the number one thing that I think would probably be what I would call a deal breaker for collectors straight out of the box is that it is made in China. But I do think that this is different than the sea of other Chinese Kickstarter watches that we're seeing in a couple critical respects. And so in this video, I am going to highlight what makes this watch ultimately interesting to me beyond just the fact that it has a pretty movement. And hopefully it's something that you might find interesting as well. So let's get into it. So the first thing that I think is interesting about this watch is it is kind of an interesting background story. This is founded by a gentleman who is from China, but is now based out of Ireland. And so it's kind of a combination of his personal history of wanting to get some high-level Chinese manufacturing for a watch movement, but then also bringing in a certain Irish touch to the movement, and the movement is regulated and serviced in Ireland. The leather watch strap, which you saw, is a kind of a Hodinkee style raw edge leather strap, is made in Ireland. And of course the Solas is Celtic, and it has certain, I would say, just Celtic influences in it. So Daihu Wu is just an interesting guy in his story, that he's in Dublin now and he's doing something that he's passionate about with watches. So I like that. But of course, you know, it has to translate into something interesting in the watch, and this is an interesting watch. It's a dress watch, first of all, so that's not going to be for everyone's taste, but the dial is a very interesting material called aventurine, which is basically a brass dial that has a glass layer on top that has a bunch of small metals that creates a very highly sparkly finish. And it isn't sparkly in a cheap way, it's sparkly in a really kind of like candy paint on a hot rod type of way. It looks cool. It's an interesting finish, and it definitely gives the watch an extra dressy feel above just let's say it had just a brushed black dial, or let's even say a matte black dial or something. It's definitely feeling dressier than that on the wrist. But of course, I think the thing that would draw you to this watch, beyond just kind of the Irish connection, if that's something that mattered to you, and the snazzy dial, is really this movement. And of course the movement, let's take a look at it. Of course it is the 5000A movement. This is a Chinese movement made by Hangzhou, which is just one of the manufacturers in China, nothing special about them. And the thing that's interesting about Microrotor movements is that, of course, enables the rotor to be nestled into the rest of the movement, thereby making the rest of the watch able to be very thin. And that's what we are looking at with this watch. It's a 38mm watch with just a 9.7mm thick case, which is really quite thin and quite comfortable. And then of course you are able to have a full display case back with lots of nice striping and pearlage on the back, as well as a little bit of exposure to some of the gearing in the movement as well, beyond just the mainspring. And so you do have really quite a pretty movement for under $400. There's if this was made in Switzerland, it would almost incontrovertibly be a $1,200 watch, I think, even being a brand new brand like this. And so for $400, I do think that it's, you're paying not for just the Chinese movement, which I'm sure was relatively inexpensive. You might be paying a little more for the dial, but what I think you're really paying for is the fact that this is going to be inspected, and any kind of servicing that's going to be needing attention with the movement is going to be done before you get it in your hands. So that level of personal touch really comes with these individual projects if they make that commitment to do that. And in this case, you know, the prototype that I received, I have to say that it does have minor imperfections in the movement, and this has been, you know, pointed out in other more detailed reviews, that there's like slight scrapes or fuzzies that if you're looking at it with a macro lens on a camera, you can detect those kind of things. But really, that's all stuff that good quality control should pick up when the watches are received in Ireland after the campaign and they're inspected. So yeah, so I think that this is a very interesting watch. If you're really passionate about movements and don't have a Microrotor watch movement in your collection, and you would like to get one that is kind of squared away right from the start. You know, dress watch in a collection is an important one, and typically my recommendation for dress watches is if you really decide you want a dress watch, get a truly dressy watch. And this very interesting sparkly dial and the Microrotor movement definitely feels special. Definitely feels like it's not a typical watch in the collection. And it still, you know, it comes in at a very wearable size at 38 millimeters. So yeah, so on the wrist, it's comfortable, it's thin, I like how it feels. It has a very clever butterfly clasp that allows you to still have the leather up against your wrist, actually, and has a very positive click when you are wearing the watch. And so overall, the build quality seems to be very nice for a prototype. It looks like the design is pretty well squared away. You know, one thing that has come up in some of the discussion on Instagram, the founder of Solas is very active on Instagram, that you know, he would have preferred to have a circular or no date aperture on the dial. And you know, it's fine, honestly. It's such a small aperture that it isn't the end of the world, and there's no like way to delete that feature on this movement. And so you would have had what they call a ghost date display. If you had just covered it up, the date wheel would still be in there. And so it doesn't really make sense to cover it up when you're doing that, because you could literally still be changing the date and have that setting in the crown and everything. So you know, that's kind of the way that a watch like this works, is you get a very interesting movement, and you definitely get a individual's idea for a design at the watch, along with some of the compromises that are going to come with getting a kind of a mass-produced movement like this. So closing thoughts, I think that this is just a fun, interesting dress watch. I like supporting micro brands. I like entrepreneurs. I like it when guys try to write and come up with an interesting story for their brand. And I found that was true of Solas. I think that they do have a very unique watch. In the week or so that I've had it, I haven't really had a lot of time to really do anything rigorous with it. The movement seems accurate, and there hasn't been really any problems. So my initial impression is really favorable for this watch, that it seems to be, you know, running just fine and doesn't seem to have any problems. I think that this is a brand to watch. You know, maybe this dress watch isn't what you're looking for specifically, but maybe in the future they'll have something a little bit more versatile. I imagine a Celtic field watch would be something I would be interested in. And so, especially with a cool movement like this, why not? There's definitely no Microrotor field watches out there, and so I would be interested in that. Guys, if you're new to the channel, make sure to hit subscribe. I'm always glad to welcome new subscribers to the channel. And if you're a regular here, I really appreciate you tuning in again. Thanks so much for watching, guys.